welcome to the Archive PD. You have
Thank you.
this book called 13 Moons that has came out. And so far, we've only talked for like, I don't know, 4 minutes. And we've already covered like a huge variety of all sorts of cool stuff related to the moon and the holidays.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited about this. And so, funny enough, Monday night is going to be another full moon. And the names I've been able to pull up for the November full moon are either the Beaver Moon, which is it just goes from Native American beliefs because it would have been the time when beavers had built their dams or whatever kind of structure it is they were spent the winter in. And then people will call this like the dark moon and frost moon. But I'm more curious now from everything you've been telling me, from like what was in European sources to the Islamic texts. Um, Fill me in, like what would have been going on around this time of year. We'll start with that.
Well, we've kind of. I haven't really found anything particular about this moon. It doesn't seem to have any particular traditions associated with it. So, but according to my understanding of the lunar calendar, it would simply be the second moon of winter. So the first moon of winter would be what I was talking about, mentioned before. It would be the full moon of the third new moon before the winter solstice. And that, I believe, would have been the date for that full moon, would have been the date for the Decemblot, which would have been in remembrance of the sort of female ancestors. And it also would have been the date, I think, for sacrifices to Frey, because it's the beginning of winter. And it's mentioned in Snorri's Heimskringla about how the pagans had three main festivals. The first was at the onset of winter, at the beginning of winter, for peace and good harvest. Till ours Okfritha, for good year, for a good year and peace. And also maybe an alpha bloat, a sacrifice to the elves, because that's mentioned. So, at the beginning of winter, there seems to be a sacrifice to the elves. So there's a lot going on for the Decemblot. And interestingly, the Decemblot is that full moon it's the most referenced heathen festival in all the sagas, even more than Yule. It's got many more references. But as I was saying to you before, there's lots of academics say, this festival would probably occur around October time, but they were unable to actually put a date on it. And I think the reason they were unable to put an exact date on it is because there wasn't one. It was actually on a full moon, on that full moon, the full moon of the third new moon before the winter solstice. Interestingly, I mean, the Celtic peoples were sort of Christianized a lot earlier than the sort of Germanic and Norse peoples. But I think that what a lot of people refer to Halloween now as Samhain, Summer's End in Gaelic, is probably the same, probably originally was a lunar festival as well. But I haven't really got any evidence for that, because there is a lot less evidence because they were Christianized so much earlier. So whatever was there has kind of disappeared. So that would be the first moon, the Decemblot. This moon coming up on Monday is the second moon of winter, and then with the third moon of winter, you enter the first Yule lunation, because there were always two lunations called Yule. So in Anglo-Saxon culture, that seems to have been Mother's Night. So this would be this would be the first new moon. The last, or if you like, the last new moon before the winter solstice. So possibly the full moon of that new moon before the winter solstice could be before the winter solstice, or it could occur after the winter solstice, depending when it falls. So that's the earlier one. I mean, I think it's in something called the Menologium, which is an Anglo-Saxon preface to an 11th century version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. It's in the Menologium, which is like it's a Christian thing. It's a liturgical roundup of the year, but it mentions Era Yeola and Aftera Yeola, which to a modern English ear, you'd look at those and think, okay, let's try and, this is the ancestor of our language. Let's have a look at it and think Era Yeola. So Yeola is like Yule, and Era, that could be earlier. The before, it's before, because that old expression, ere long he will be dead, or whatever, or ere spring or whatever. The ere would be, it's a shortened version, I imagine, of before. And Aftera, well, that's clearly like after. So you've got before and after Yule. After Yule. So what are they before and after? Oh, well, a lot of people would jump to the conclusion that it's the solstice. Yule is the solstice. But actually, if you consult Anglo-Saxon dictionaries, you'll see that the actual meaning of era just means earlier, and Aftera means later. So I'm sure Aftera has evolved into after, but its meaning has changed somewhat. So it actually originally meant just later. So you've got the before Yule, the earlier Yule, and the later Yule. Just two Yule lunations, with the solstice having a part to play in it, but not the Yule is not solstice, is not the solstice. It's similarly at midsummer in the Venerable Bede's description that he wrote in a book called De Temporum Ratione, which is the reckoning of time. He wrote it in about 725 CE. He says that the Anglo-Saxons celebrated according to the moon, reckon time according to the moon, and the summer, similar, just as midwinter has two Yule lunations, so midsummer also has two Lither lunations. So it has the lithe months of summer, the sort of like would be again two lunations at the sort of extremes of the sort of solar light. Yeah, so the most important one for Yule, the second Yule moon, I think, would be the sort of Nordic Yola, the festival of Yule. So that would be the full moon of the first new moon after the winter solstice. When that was full, I think this year it occurs quite late, about the 28th of January, before it gets to be full. And I think that was when the Yule was the full moon of the first new moon after the winter solstice. You then go on and you have another moon which doesn't really have any sort of special associations with it. And then you come on to the sixth moon of winter, which is the Disting moon, which again, the name Disting, it seems to be like a gathering, an assembly that also venerated the Disir. So it seems to me that although the Disir Blot that we know from Norway is quite separate from the Disir Blot, Disir Ting that was celebrated in Sweden, I quite like the idea that in wintertime the ancestors were venerated, or it was a time when the other world and the supernatural, the dead, the ghosts, the ancestors drew near, and they're marked at either end of the winter season. At the beginning of the winter season, you have the Disir Blot, and albeit it's separated in time and space by a different reference, but at the end of winter, there's also an attestation for a heathen festival venerating the Disir at the end of winter. And then the following one, you then get beginning of the first 6 moons of summer, of the summer half of the year.
So this would mean that they only had 2 seasons back then, and during this time.
Yeah.
So they only had 2 seasons. So there's summer and winter. That's interesting.
Yeah. Initially they did, but I mean they do later on. They did sort of. I know there's a famous poem called Haustlong. Can't remember who it's by. But it's called Autumn Long because it took him all autumn to to compose this poem. They did come to accept the idea that there was other seasons as well. But initially, the oldest sort of references would be just to 2 halves of the year, and that's why they always reckoned their time in winters. They'd say, "Oh, when Olaf was only 15 winters old." Well, he's obviously alive during the summers as well, but they just reckoned time by winters, just like they reckoned time by nights. Which we still see surviving in phrases like a fortnight. It's just
Okay.
like a 2 week.
So what,
2 week
but
thing.
what, yeah, so what would make the importance of winters or nights over days or summers?
That's a good question. I think it just seems to be the case that they just reckoned time by nights. It seems to be, whereas we sort of conceive, well, there's a couple of ways that we conceive of time. There's that at 5 to midnight, there's only 5 more minutes of this day left, and then at midnight, dong, the clock strikes, and it's the next day. Okay, that's kind of like a sort of rational scientific way of doing it. Most people sort of think, oh, the day dawns when the sun comes up. That's the new day. That's the start of the new day when the day dawns. But it seems to be that sort of like both Germanic and Celtic peoples in northwestern Europe reckon time by not the beginning of darkness, not the middle of not the middle of darkness when it's getting, and then it slowly starts to get light. It starts with the onset of darkness. It starts at dusk. So a day, what we'd call a day, or they would call a night starts at dusk. It's the start of the night. Whippy, it's the start of the night time. And this is the start of a new cycle. And in the same way that they would do that, that's why you get still today, people talk about, Christmas Eve, May Eve, All Hallows Eve, St. John's Eve. They're all, the evening is when is looking forward to the next day. And similarly, they did the same with their years. The year started with the beginning of the season of darkness. So around October time, around this moon, they would start to that would be the start of the new year. I believe, and I haven't really got any evidence to back this up, but it seems likely to me on the basis that, well, I do know that Samhain, the Celtic festival of Samhain, was regarded as the new year. Okay, so it's not Christmas time, or it's not January the 1st or anything like that. That Samhain was the new year. And I think that was probably originally a lunar festival as well, before it became artificially fixed to the 31st of October. You could look at that and say, well, if Dieselblot was like the lunar new year, so that was the beginning of the onset of darkness, because everything starts. Maybe it's because, I don't know. Maybe, I mean, sort of thinking, sort of poetically about it, I could say that the onset of darkness is a period of gestation. All life begins in the dark.
Yeah.
They begin in dark places, and then it slowly comes to birth. Whatever it is, whether it's a year or a plant or a human baby or a calf or whatever it is, they all start in the dark. So it's perhaps this idea that everything comes from the dark.
Interesting theory. Yeah, that is a really unique theory. So I am curious too, because we literally have Christmas songs that will say Yuletide Carol or Yuletide tradition or the Yule tradition, or I don't know where a chocolate Yule log comes from in particular, one of my favorite treats of them all. But
yeah.
I don't blame the church for wanting to get their hands on that one if that was the case.
Yeah.
But do we have was there something really specific with these cultures during Yuletide or during the time of Yule that stood out? Because for some reason, I don't know if we actually have like evidence for it or not. But I know between
Hmm.
Yule, well, maybe Yule, but I know between Saturnalia, uh, where the Catholic influence began, when Rome converted over to Christianity, and
Yeah.
then at one point there was a pope that just kind of made the decision like, hey, December the 25th, this is when Jesus was born. Um, was there anything specific that stood out during that time or during
Yes.
like, the Norse convergence or some of the European tribes' convergence?
Well, that's interesting you should say that. I mean, again, a lot of people have this idea that Christmas was originally on the solstice and that it was then kind of shunted, perhaps due to changes in the calendar, or perhaps some pope changed it to the 25th. But really, it was on the it used to be on the 21st. But actually, Christmas Day was never ever on the solstice, not ever ever ever. And I can absolutely sort of explain why this, and it is about Saturnalia. It's all about Saturnalia. It's nothing to do with Northwestern European paganism. It's everything to do with Saturnalia. So when
Those no good
if
Romans. Those no good Romans.
no, those bloody Romans have got a lot to answer for. I'll tell you, they really have. I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, we'll talk. We can talk about midwinter, and then we can talk about the Romans in midsummer and the kind of havoc they've created with our calendars there. But with regard to midwinter, when when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, um, they did away with a lot of pagan customs, but they couldn't get away with doing away with Saturnalia because it was just far too popular. You know, the mob in Rome loved Saturnalia, so Saturnalia just went ahead, whatever. Um, Saturnalia, as you can imagine, was a period marked by raucous festivities, drinking, overeating, overindulgence in everything that the church kind of disapproved of. So it was not a time that that the church wanted to have associated with Christianity in any way, shape, or form. Okay, they didn't want this idea that Christianity was really to do with Saturnalia. So they waited until Saturnalia was over, and then they held Christmas. So the solstice is kind of because the period of Saturnalia covers the solstice. The solstice does have something to do with Christmas, but it's wanting to avoid the solstice, that it happened on the 25th of December. It's not wanting to say, oh, we're going to take it over. We're going to make it, the most popular festival. It's going to be ours now. We're going to make it ours. No, they can just think, no, we don't want it to be anything to do with us. Thank you very much. If you must have it, just get on with it. And as soon as it's over, then we'll have Christmas. Then we'll have a Christmas. It'll be our festival, our time, and nothing to do with that bloody awful Saturnalia, you know. Interestingly, Saturn, of course, was a kind of like a death god, a dark god. Obviously, his festival was held over the darkest period of the year, but he's not a sun god. You know, I don't think the Romans were celebrating the return of the sun necessarily. They were just thinking this is the darkest time. There's nothing else to do. Just let's get pissed. You know, so that's what they did.
That's crazy stuff.
So that it's always been on the 25th, whether it's been the Julian calendar or later on the adoption of the Gregorian calendar, it's always on the 25th of December. And people like the Gnostic Christians, that still use the Julian calendar, they celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December. But because the Julian calendar has slowly been sliding out of whack with what's actually happening in the heavens, and which is why the Gregorian calendar was adopted because it's more accurate. December the 25th in the Julian calendar is usually about January. At the moment, it's getting more and more out of whack. I think at the moment it's about January the 11th. So on January the 11th, all the Gnostic Christians celebrate Christmas on their 25th of December. Thank you very much. So, so it's never been, Christmas has never been on the solstice. In fact, it's been, the reason it's on the 25th is to avoid the solstice. And I think when people came up, you know, when the Christian missionaries sort of spread throughout Europe and started converting peoples, they introduced their calendar, and they introduced their festival of Christmas on the 25th. So this idea that the Christians stole Yule offers is just completely erroneous.
All right, that's really funny. I'll mark my calendar for January the 11th, the Julian, the Gnostic Christmas.
Yeah, it's an alter. I mean, you can look it up. I mean, it changes every year because it's slowly sliding, getting more and more out of sync with the Gregorian calendar. But I don't know. I don't know if it is January the 11th. It might even be later by now. But yeah, I mean, I suppose whilst I'm on about this, we could talk about Midsummer as well. There is no reference to any celebrations, heathen celebrations taking place in Europe at Midsummer in the pre-Christian times. And it's only in the early Middle Ages that you get any reference to Midsummer celebrations. But these Midsummer celebrations are again not the solstice. They're St. John's Eve. And again, why is it the 24th of June that St. John's Eve happens? It's because the Romans had a festival of Fortuna, the goddess of luck, of good fortune or bad fortune, you know. She was the, you know, what was it called? The Imperatrix Mundi, the empress of the world. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to luck, doesn't it? So much in life just comes down to luck. You're born into a war zone. You're born into an era of prosperity and peace. It's all just luck. You know, a lot of life is luck. You can make your own luck, of course, to a degree, but you know, what the start you get in life is a lot to do with it, and what happens to you. And things can come along that can just destroy your luck or just lift you to the. And the Romans were very aware of this, you know, that people could rise to fame, be enormously popular, and then suddenly the mob thinks, "Oh, we're sick of you. We don't want you anymore." And even emperors got assassinated. You know, it could all end. And the Romans like to celebrate the festival of Fortuna at the summer solstice. Why? Because at the height of the year, the sun, it's at its height. It's really hot. It's high in the sky. It's never been higher. It's getting higher and higher and higher. But then what happens? It starts to fall. It starts to get weaker and weaker. The days get shorter and shorter. Even the sun falls. Yeah, it rises to the height of its fame and power and glory, and then it starts to fall. Fortuna, similarly like Saturn, is not a solar. She's not a solar deity, but it's a demonstration. The reason they chose it was that like anybody's luck can change. The wheel of fortune goes up, and the wheel of fortune keeps turning, and it goes around and down and round and round. So when the Romans came along, when the Roman Church came along, they said, we would like to adopt not the solstice, but a bit after the solstice, when the sun has already got a few days behind, because we don't want to be associated again with the festival of Fortuna, you know, because life on Earth is not determined by fortune, by luck. It's determined by God. So we will have a Christian example of somebody who reaches great heights and then falls. And St. John is a great example of that because, well, during his lifetime, a lot of people thought that John the Baptist was the Messiah. It's him. He's the one. It's him. But at the height of his fame, what happened? He gets his head cut off. And just like anyone else, he's dependent upon Christ's salvation. You know, he's dependent. So that's why he's a great example, because everybody thought he was the dog's bits, And then at the height of his fame, he's gone. And just like any other human being, he's dependent upon Christ's salvation. So that's why they celebrated St. John's Eve just after the solstice. Again, when that got spread into Northwest Europe, that was adopted and taken up, and people enjoyed it, and ordinary people would have fun and have fairs, and and that the reason it's popular is because it's the excuse for a party. We'll go to church, and then we'll go out into the fields and get pissed. Just like we do at midwinter. We'll go to church, and then we'll go and have a huge feast, get pissed.
All right. Doesn't matter what religion it was, everybody did the same thing.
Yeah. Well, actually, when you were saying about what particular activities would take place at Yule, I suppose that the short and I don't mean to sound so superficial about it, but festive drinking is what happened. It's drinking.
Yeah.
It's all about drinking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back then too, it's kind of really all you had. You had to, if you wanted to do music, you had to make your own instruments. If somebody would read a story or sing a song, and then it's other than that, you just got food and alcohol.
Yeah, and that's it, and that's all you could sort of muster. It's interesting though I was going to say something about the Midsummer. Oh yeah, there is one reference to. In the saga of Olaf Tryggvason, he mentions there's an episode where Olaf turns up, and as you know, he was the evangelizing king. He converted in his short reign between 995 and the year 1000. He converted Norway, not in a pleasant way, not in a very loving way. He did it the hard way. You can convert or die, or I'll torture you. How about that? I could just torture you until you convert,
or you die.
Think about that.
Or you
before you die. Before I start torturing you, you might want to think about just converting without me torturing you. But if you want to be tortured, I'm quite happy to do it. So he would convert people. At one point, he's got a lot of the farmers, the yeomen are against him, and he's realised that he's actually put himself in a bad position because the men at arms he has with him are not enough to win the argument by having a fight, having a battle. So he says, "Look, why don't I let's not rush into anything. Let's I tell you what, I'll invite you to a midsummer blot, a Mithsumar bloat, and we'll all meet again, and then we can discuss this rationally and reasonably, and can we just talk about it? We'll all meet again at Midsummer, okay? So off they go. When he returns for the Mithsumar bloat, he's made damn sure he's got a fucking huge army with him. So he's going to win the argument, because, you tend to take more notice of what people are saying when they've got thousands and thousands of armed warriors standing behind him, ready to go at a moment's notice. And you're the one that's outnumbered now. So, but that's just the base of the story. But what's interesting is people say, so there was a Mithsumar bloat, a midsummer sacrifice. There was one. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, that's the only reference to it. Secondly, we're so used to in our solar day orientated Gregorian calendar way of thinking midsummer, well, that'll be the midsummer solstice. So it could have been a midsummer according to the lunar calendar. Yeah. Could have been in the third or fourth lither lunation, as the Anglo-Saxons would call it. But also, it seems to be that a lot of that the midsummer celebration, St. John's Eve celebration, was something that was introduced by the Roman Catholic missionaries. It was brought in to Europe, and a lot of kings adopted it. And I think Olaf, wanting to be, keeping up with the Joneses, he quite possibly just introduced it as well. And when these yeoman farmers are invited by him to a Mithsumar bloat, they sort of think, a what? A what? What's he on about? Well, it's a bloat. Will they be drinking? Yeah. Okay. We'll go along with it. Okay. We'll come along. So I don't think that necessarily there was such a thing as a midsummer celebration in in heathen Europe
Okay.
until the Romans came along.
Okay. That is pretty interesting. Do that. So was summertime not seen like in terms of the celebration as important because people would have been out more and it was a growing season and this was your time to farm?
You actually you've answered your own question there. I think it's yes, it is a very important time, but in a way, it's kind of too important to be. You haven't got much time. You're so busy in summer. If you're a farmer or you're a raider, all these activities, it's a really busy time, and you haven't got time to be setting up big boats where people get pissed for 3 days. You just haven't got that time. Um, you'll be busy, 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 busy. It's only when winter comes, suddenly you've got an abundance of time because as I've found out by personal experience very recently, these last few years, when these really bad storms we've been getting, living out in the sticks where I do, suddenly, plum, your electric's gone. And I think the longest we've been without electricity was 6 days, right? 6 days without electricity is a bloody long time, right? So what happens is the days are very short, but then what happens, this time, 4 o'clock, it starts to get dark. What are you going to do? There's nothing you can do. You can't go out because you're falling over things in the dark. You stay in. We haven't even got telly. We can't use a CD player. We can't use our computers. We can't use anything. We've got candles. So what are we going to do? Well, we could get pissed. You would have the time then to say, let's have a proper celebration to the deities or the gods. We can do it in winter because there's plenty of time in winter. There's a great time for just sitting drinking ale at the benches, telling stories, making music, doing that. But in summer, you're busy. You're either busy farming or you're out raiding. And when you're out raiding in enemy territory, you can't really say, oh, I've got a good idea. Let's get pissed for 3 days and have a midsummer sacrifice whilst we're in if you're a Norwegian Viking and you've penetrated into the heart of Mercia in England, you're not going to, you're on a war footing. You can't say to soldiers on campaign, oh, let's just take it easy and have a sacrifice to the gods and, get pissed for 3 days. You can't do that. When winter comes and everybody gives up war, because in those days, very sensibly, when winter came, people stopped warring. They went home or they just made camp and they said, right, no more fight. I mean, that went right up into the high Middle Ages. Only an idiot would carry on fighting into autumn and then into winter. How's that going to work? So I think really midsummer, summer is important, obviously, but it's a time when people were probably far too busy doing other things to give much time and attention to their religious life.
Yeah.
That's what
Was
I think.
there any pre-Christian like celebrations or holidays like to kick off the change of the season or?
Yeah, the change of the season. Again, that the DC Oblot would be the beginning of winter, and the first moon of summer, the one after the Disting sort of moon, would be a victory bloat. Sigur bloat would be for a sacrifice for victory in conflict or whatever. And that would be at the beginning of summer, which of course is the beginning of the raiding season or the beginning of the warring season again. We're going to try and beat our next door neighbors up again. So it's the beginning. So let's have a sacrifice now at the beginning of the season. Then we can all go off to war because the weather's getting better and the days are getting longer. So those would be the beginning. Also, there's a mention of Bede mentions Eostre as for that moon also as a goddess that was festivities were held in her honor at that moon. That is the only reference to Eostre. Just that one little reference. And all we know about her is that on that moon, the beginning of summer, people held festivals in her honor. There's a Frankish calendar which has a month name for that same period of time called Ostar. So it sounds a bit like Yostra, Ostar, but it's just a name. Nobody says, yes, there was a goddess called Ostara, which a lot of people have assumed. I think the Grimm brothers, who were into researching Germanic mythology, said, oh, Ostar, if you made that into a noun, it would be Ostara, and so she's the goddess of spring. But there's no proof of that. It was just in the Frankish calendar that survived. It was just a month name. And then for the Eostra, you've just got, which obviously I think is where we get our word Easter from. So I think there probably was a goddess called Eostra, and at that first moon of first lunation, full moon of summer, there would have been a festival in her honor to mark the beginning of summer. And the Christian, somehow that got adopted into Christianity, but not on the full moon. It would be taken into a liturgical calendar. And Easter isn't the name of a Christian saint or deity. It's just the name of that festival. Really, it's all about the resurrection of Jesus, isn't it?
Okay.
When he came back to life after 3 days in the cave or whatever. So that's what it. So yeah, there would be the beginning of the seasons, but they wouldn't be like sort of thinking, right, it's the 21st of June, it's the beginning of, or whatever. It's not. It would have all been on a lunar festival basis, I think. Disting, yeah. So dis as in Decia, the female ancestral spirits, and the ting. I think by that period in Swedish, they'd lost the th sound, so it's actually a thing. Like the Icelandic thing. The annual assembly in Iceland was called the Thing, where people would assemble and work out marriage arrangements, contracts, and do business and just have a get together. So a thing was an assembly. So a disting would be an assembly around the disting moon. So it would be, again, worked out by a lunation period of a full moon.
Okay.
I mean, in one way, there's a practical reason for that, isn't there? Because it's like having a hunter's moon. A hunter's moon is just another name for a full moon, because you can't go stumbling around. If you've got a full moon, that gives you some light to see by, doesn't it? In the days before electric torches and infrared goggles and what have you, you've got a chance of seeing your prey or whatever when you go out hunting at night. In the dark of the moon, or if it's overcast, you can't see anything in the pitch black. So I think if people needed to travel any distance to go, maybe they've been invited to a neighbouring farm's celebration. Oh, why don't you come over to us for Disting or Dieselblot or whatever, or for Yule or whatever. If you're travelling, then the days are short. If you're going to be late getting there, you want a nice full moon to celebrate, to help you get the last leg of the journey, be able to see the farm in the darkness or whatever. Interestingly, though, also there's the greatest heathen festivals kind of weren't yearly events. They were celebrating or marking periods of time. Again, it's all to do with like the reckoning of time. You've got the Octoteris, which is an 8-year cycle of the moon, and the Metonic cycle of the moon, which is a 19-year cycle, nearly a 19-year cycle. And interestingly, there's a couple of there's one Swedish archaeoastronomer called Göran Henriksson, who's worked out that the alignments at Uppsala in Sweden kind of mark these turning points. And we all know the interesting fascinating descriptions that we've had about the sacrificial rites at Uppsala, where every 8th year or every 9th year, Göran Henriksson has said, actually, when they're talking about a 9th year, what they really mean is the 8th year, because they didn't have a mathematical concept of zero. So when they started a new cycle of time, according to this 8-year cycle, lunar cycle, which you would mark it because you would know that every 8 years, every 8 solar years, the moon will appear in roughly the same place at roughly the same time, at roughly the same phase, within a day or two. So some of the monuments at Uppsala mark this. So they would just wait and wait and say, "Oh, have you noticed how the moon's getting closer and closer to where the stars? Yeah, oh, yep, next year it's going to be. Yeah, look, see, next year, here's next year. Boom, the moon is rising full, and it's rising right over that stone. So we know that it's next year. It's going to be the great Uppsala festival. We get to sacrifice loads of animals and people, and and the symbolism of the number of animals that was sacrificed is symbolic, because it was, I think, there's also evidence for this at Lera, which was in Denmark. So there's Uppsala and Lera, both had these festivals on the 9th, what they would call, sorry, I didn't finish explaining about so you start a period of time, and straight away we would say, when a year has passed, that's 1 year. But they would say, no, the year started, so this is year 1. We're in year 1. We're only a day into year 1, but it's year 1. And then we're a day into year 2, and that would go on. So the 8th year would actually, the beginning of the 8th, they would have the 8th year, and then the 9th year would actually be the first year of the next cycle. And these festivals had 2 numerical proofs. So 72, yeah. Over 9 days, 8 animals would be sacrificed, making a total of 72. Theitmar of Meseberg in 1012 wrote about Lera, and he said there are, over 9 days, there are 99 sacrifices. Now, in the Octeris, in 8 solar years, there will be 99 lunations. So it'll be 99 lunar cycles before they start repeating. Same place, same phase. Another 99 new lunations go past. It's back again, same place, same time. So there's our sort of numerological symbolism in the number of sacrifices that have been made to these sort of cycles, and they're the biggest ones. And I think it would be fun to, well, be sort of important to kind of reintroduce those festivals that happen every 8 or 9 years. I don't know how we could do it though, because the trouble with the lunar festival is it doesn't take. I suppose it's equally the same with solstices and equinoxes, but a lot of people now just celebrate on the nearest weekend, don't they? Because they're at work all week, so they just say, "Oh, we'll have to be at the weekend." But I don't do that, actually. I mean, when Yule comes along, so it's recorded in Heimskringla that the feasting went on at Yule for 3 nights, not 12 nights like in the sort of Christian tradition, but 3 nights. As did Dieselblot. Dieselblot is recorded as going on for 3 nights. So it'll be the night before the full moon, the night of the full moon, the night after the full moon. But what I do for Yule is I take 3 days off work. So if it falls on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, well, that's good. I've only got 1 day to take off. But if it falls on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'll take those Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off work, because I am in a position to be able to do that. People think it's a bit odd. Why are you taking 3 days off in the middle of January? Because I just want to. Okay, so it's my business, but I take the time off then, and I can celebrate those and keep them special, rather than just saying, "Oh, I'll just do it at the next weekend," because it won't be the full moon then. If it's a lunar festival, it's a lunar festival, isn't it?
Yeah. So what made it's so important to take that time to feast? Do they have a different perspective on feasting at that time, or is that just the time where you're you can actually just get out a bunch of food and just, grub out.
Yeah. What made it? I don't know. I mean, I think it just would have been a sacred time. It would have been a time that, first of all, would have been recognizable. You would see the moon every night and think, all right, the next full, it's coming up only a week away now, and then we can have this celebration. We need to, if we're going over to somebody else's for this celebration, we need to set off. I mean, certainly for the Octoteris and Metonic cycle celebrations at Uppsala and Lera, it's actually recorded that people were required to attend, so that representatives from every district would have to go to the big festival, so that the whole kingdom would be represented, not by the whole entire population, but important people from each district would have to go, so that symbolically the whole nation would be gathered at the major festival. I think these were times when, you would be able to, especially at night time, because it's so dark, you would be able to have that stillness within yourself, because it's dark outside. It's more of an introspective time. It's more of a spiritual time. It's very difficult to sort of imagine exactly what their mindset was when they're sort of performing their ceremonies. But if you're, but they would be sacrificing animals, which would be a big deal. I mean, I had a friend who married a Gambian man, and she said when they went to the village where a lot of his relatives lived, they said, "Oh, Mass is coming, Mo's coming with his new wife, and she's from England, and this is a big deal, So they killed a goat." They killed a goat so they could have a goat stew. That is a big deal for a poor rural people. Killing a goat means no more milk from that goat, on a regular basis, or no more kids being born from that goat on a regular basis. If you're killing that goat, that is a big deal. And it would be the same for the Icelanders and the Norse peoples and the Germanic peoples generally. If you're killing, it's the same with the Celtic peoples. I mean, they're cattle, they're both similar cattle rearing economies, but killing them is still a big deal. You're literally killing your wealth. Maybe you wouldn't be able to keep all of your wealth in terms of how much hay have you got to feed them throughout the winter, so you maybe want to kill them anyway, but you make a special occasion of it. It's a recognition of it, of this sort of the sanctity of the life that you're giving, that you are actually sacrificing a life, and the life force is in the blood. It seems to be that the blood would be given to the gods, and the meat, the people would eat the meat, because nothing's going to go to waste. So I think, people would be worshipping the gods during that time. That's what they would be drinking, but they would be, I guess. I mean, I know a lot of people say this, but it sounds a bit trite, but I think it's true, and it would be lovely to be in a situation where you could experience. But I think in those times there wasn't that distinction between the sacred and the profane, between the spiritual and the secular. But at those times, people would come into a heightened awareness of the holiness of the time, that they would be in a period of holiness, and there would be, and they have this thing about, frith, you keep the frith, you don't cause trouble, you keep peaceful, everything has to be nice, peaceful, together, everybody's together, whether it's the district, people from the district coming together, or family coming together. Now, I know you don't get on with your cousin, but I don't want you having any arguments with him, right? This it's Yule, or it's Dieselblod, or whatever it is. We're all going to come together, and we're going to remember that we're an extended family, and this is a special time when we remember our ancestors and we sacrifice to the gods, and it's all going to be great. And it's going to be, they would want an atmosphere of holiness to preside over the entire period of time and over the entire place where that was happening.
Yeah.
I think that's that's kind of what they would do. They would be communing with their innermost selves and communing with their ancestors and communing with their gods, and that they would go away from that kind of like spiritually renewed, I guess.
Okay. Yes, that's kind of like a time to just drop everything and
Yeah, yeah,
maybe talk it over by drinking
yeah,
and
yeah. So
think about some stuff. Did anyone write anything down like that? Like, oh, I thought about this thing about myself. Did anybody put that on paper at any point? Do we have any of that?
any of what? Sorry.
Like anyone like thinking about like, oh, there, any introspective, is that documented anywhere?
I think there's one or two references in some sagas how at Yuletide some people could do sitting out. Have you heard of that practice, sitting out?
I have,
Altitude
but
Theta? Yeah,
let's explain it for people at home who might be hearing
yeah.
about it for the first time.
It's where people would go outside into the dark, wander off and sit maybe on a grave mound or just in the middle of nowhere. Um, and again, that's it. They've gone out. The door closing behind it, and they're going to sit out somewhere. But what they actually did whilst they were sitting out, nobody knows. But it seems to me to be suggesting that they're going out to commune with something, either nature spirits, or if they're going to sit on a grave mound, maybe they want to commune with an ancestor, maybe ask for advice, maybe ask that in a dream they'll get something. Who knows what went on? But it seems to be quite like what we would more term as like a spiritual kind of practice in the sort of Judeo-Christian world, that we think of these things as like something separate. Sitting up. I have to say though that that when I first read these descriptions of people going for sitting out at Yule, I thought, what, in Iceland? Bloody hell, it must have been freezing, absolutely freezing, sitting on a grave mound in the middle of the dark in Iceland. I mean, it must have been sub-zero. I, I, so I don't, you know, you got to remember all these sagas were written down in the sort of like early 1200s, 1300s, a long, fair, not well, maybe not in the great scheme of things, but some time after people would have actually been practicing heathens. I think sitting out obviously is attested as a practice, but whether they would have, maybe this saga writer thought, oh, it'd be cool to have them doing sitting out at Yule. But I don't know how long you would survive sat out. I mean, if the weather was still and there was no wind and there wasn't a blizzard, you could maybe sit out there for a while. But I don't know how long you could actually survive sat out there just doing it. But at other times of the year, you could. You could do sitting out in at other times of the year. You could get away with it for a lot longer before you freeze to death. So there's things like that. But no, there isn't really. I can't really see any. Some people say that some people are recorded as being more religious, or that some people had a particular affinity with the god Frey. There's that man who keeps a stallion. He dedicates a stallion to Frey. So that means he has the expense of feeding that stallion and looking after it, but nobody rides it because the horse is dedicated to Frey. It's Frey's horse. It's not for any mortal to ride. So there's evidence of sort of spirit, but there's no real sort of introspection in terms of sort of meditation or spirit, vision quests or anything, any sort of those sort of things. No, there isn't. Not that I've come across anyway.
Okay. Now, were there other like after Yule, like were there other really important moons through the winter, like other important festivals or holidays or celebrations that were being done?
No, just the Disting moon, which would then be followed by the Eostra moon, or the Sigurbalot moon, the Victory moon. No, So some moons, there's a couple of moons in the winter that don't really have anything attached to them. Like this one coming up now doesn't. It's the second moon of winter. Doesn't really have any particular thing associated with it. The one after this one, the what the Saxons would call the Era Eola moon, the first Yule moon. Bede talks about that being Mother's Night. So again, you have a reference. It's quite Mother's Night in the plural. It's more than one mother. Mother's Night. And he gets very confused at this point. I mean, I discuss it in the book, trying to make sense of what he says. But I think he's just got quite confused. But it seems to me that, again, the Mother's Night, I think, well, who are the mothers? Well, sure, perhaps the mothers are another sort of Saxon name for the Decia. So that would mean that you would have the, albeit across, again, like I said before, across different times and places and culture, and all Germanic cultures, but different cultures. You would have a Decia at the beginning of winter in Norway. You have Mother's Night in the middle of winter. That's the third moon of winter. So the first moon, the third moon, and the sixth moon, you have the Disting festival in Sweden. So all that period of time. This is something that I discuss about an article by an academic called Terry Gunnell in his article called The Season of the Decia. He says there is that idea, seems to be the idea that throughout the winter period, women ancestors were venerated, but it said perhaps it's a time when women's skills were venerated in the home, that it was a domestic time when the domestic came to the fore, because you'd be indoors as much as possible. When it's really, really cold outside, you'd stay in as much. If you have to go out to milk the cows, okay, fair enough. You have to go out to get the firewood, okay. But you'd want to be back inside. You wouldn't be sort of thinking, oh, isn't it fun in the snow? It wouldn't be. It'd be bloody freezing, So you'd want to get back in. And women's activities came to the fore, like ale brewing and spinning and, making cloth. Things that would produce wealth for people, not the drink, but making the cloth would produce wealth for people. Like in Iceland, the looms were actually a way of making wealth. You could sell that stuff. It was actually sort of almost used like a currency, sort of bolts of cloth that have been spun during the winter. So all the women's skills are coming to the fore. So it's kind of appropriate that the female ancestresses are venerated during that time. And then in the summer, the men are all out plowing the fields, getting the ships ready, going off to raid or trade or whatever, So there seems to be that dichotomy, I think, between the summer and the winter. There's more active outdoors in the summer, but more indoors, and it's the feminine idea of everything centering around the hearth being like a sort of sacred, holy thing. Again, it's not directly attested that the hearth was holy, but I sort of think it's sort of in a sort of mythically thinking sort of way that the women are nearest the hearth because they're the ones that are baking bread on it, cooking on it. And the hearth is the holiness, so that the women are the holier sex. They're kind of because they're nearest the center of the holiness of any kindred, of any clan, is the fireplace. That's just more my way of thinking.
Yeah. Well, that's what's gonna heat your house up. I mean, it used to be these giant, like this wall would have been a fireplace at that time.
Yeah.
And
what you mean like medieval fireplaces, just like huge fireplaces.
Yeah, and I mean, from what I've seen, I mean, fireplaces back not just as a medieval thing, but we used to live in smaller homes with bigger fireplaces too.
Yeah, smaller homes but bigger fireplaces. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Life would have revolved around the fireplace, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
in winter, anyway. In winter.
Yeah. There's this one guy I talked to. who works at Salem Chamber of Commerce, and he said, yeah, it's interesting how it used to just be all about gathering every little thing to keep you warm or to keep the fire going during the winter time. And
Yeah,
there's all about building
yeah,
up every calorie possible just to survive it
yeah,
out. And
yeah,
what a pleasant way to
yeah,
live.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So what
But
about you said that there's 13 moons.
ah,
Is there anything with like whenever we get like an odd year and we get an additional moon?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So these are called embolismic moons. These are what astronomers call them, embolismic moons. Yeah, I think certainly no longer than 2 years and 11 months. Every 2 years and 11 months, at the absolute most, you will get 13 lunations in a solar year. So in our calendrical year, from whenever to whenever, you will get 13 lunations. Because the moon's lunations, well, the moon's year, or getting round, doesn't match up with the sun. So when you get 13 lunations in a year, that's going to put everything out of sync. But the Anglo-Saxons, and Bede explains this quite clearly, they have a very straightforward way of dealing with this. They would say, right, in the middle of summer, you've got your two liver months, yeah, in sort of June, July usually, but you've got your two liver months. So if there is 13 lunations, they would insert a third lither month into the middle of summer. So you'd have a Era lither, Aftera lither. You'd have 3 moons over the summer period, over that summer period. That would mean that the third new moon before the winter solstice, when full, would still be the Dieselblot moon. It wouldn't get shunted out of sync. Again, a lot of modern heathens and pagans, they just sort of think, oh look, there's 2 moons. They'll look at a calendar and think, oh look, there's 2 full moons in March. So that's a blue moon. There's a blue moon in March. But for the purposes of a lunar calendar, it isn't about when it artificially occurs within the demarcations of the Gregorian calendar. It's about keeping it in sync. So you would have it. They would just insert an extra one into the middle of summer. But how would they know in advance that there was going to be 13 lunations in the year coming up? They got to have a kind of foreknowledge that we need to insert an extra moon into the period of time of summer. How would they know? Andreas Nordberg tells us how they would know. He says, the winter solstice comes. Again, this is the reason why the winter solstice is important, has a role to play in the solar lunar calendar. The winter solstice comes. Day 1 of the winter solstice. If a new moon occurs within 11 days from the winter solstice, there will be 13 lunations that year before the next winter solstice. So it's quite straightforward. So that's how they knew. He'd worked that out, and he thought he said, well, if I can work it out, they'll have worked it out a long time, you know. So that's how it works. You just watch the winter solstice, say, right, if there's a new moon within 11 days, we need to insert another lunation into the period of summer. So there will be seven moons in that summer. Instead of the usual 6, there would be the 7. And that's how they do it.
Excellent.
Very clever. Yeah.
Excellent. I think that's you got anything else you'd want to share?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
All right. Well,
in my book, in the book that I've got, that's probably a quick plug. At the end of it, the first half of it is covering all this stuff and more, but in the second half, I actually go into I just what I wanted to do was write some poems. So there we are. It starts off with the poems, and these are poems that I've written for each moon. So like the first one, the first moon of the year is winter full moon, the Dieselblock moon. I include poems to the winter full moon itself, and then an offering to Frey, an Alpha Bloat, and a Dieselbloat poem. But then in the second moon of winter, which hasn't got anything particularly associated with it, I've just got a poem to the second moon of winter, just one poem. And these are poems that people could include in ceremonies or rituals if they wanted to. Because I suppose something I should mention is it isn't actually recorded that people celebrated every full moon. It is recorded, but it does say in very early sources like Tacitus's Germania that the Romans would meet at the new moon or at the full of the moon. So it suggests that they maybe had some ceremonies, perhaps at the full moon, but that's when they would want to meet. Which again makes sense if you're going to meet at night. It'd be sense for a full moon. Again, it doesn't make sense for a new moon, but there does seem to be sometimes they would not do anything before the new moon arrived. I mean, there's one record that I think it was Julius Caesar in his Gallic War said they would the certain tribe they wouldn't engage the Romans in battle until the new moon had arrived. And as soon as the new moon arrived, they said, now we'll take them on. They lost, of course, but now we'll take them on. They wouldn't do it until the moon was waxing. So there does seem to be this suggestion that people might have done things at the new moon. But I like to observe each full moon, even if there's no special festival attached to it. And I've written a series of poems to reflect that. Set 13 poems.
All right, it gives you your homework.
Pardon?
I said it gives people their homework.
Gives people their homework, yeah. You should learn it off by heart. Learn it off by heart and recite it off by heart. Or they could read it.
Yeah.
But that's another thing about ritual, modern ritual, is that I mean, I years ago I used to be in a Wiccan coven many years ago, and they read everything out of their Book of Shadows. You know, the whole ritual was from beginning to end was read out. And I thought, some of you have been doing this for years and you still haven't learned it. You know, the bits are the same every year. So I think it's a lot more effective if people learn and recite what it is they want to say at a ceremony, no matter how simple or how complicated. If you can recite it by heart, then it comes from the heart because you've actually ingrained those words into your mind. Yeah. But that's just me. Yeah.
Yeah, and you learn how to make it your own.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the idea of you have to say something. You know, this is always it's like when a lot of people go to a lot of modern secular funerals. You go to a crematorium, you've got a half-hour slot before the next coffin's due. So there he is, and people say, somebody will say something, or somebody will say a prayer, and then somebody will say, would anybody else like to say anything? And a lot of people, they don't have anything to say. They don't know what to say. It's difficult. It's awkward. It's embarrassing. So they sit there for sort of like 20 minutes, and then the button gets pressed, and he slides into the flames. Because people don't know what to say. But they could, if they wanted to, just look for a poem or something, or have something to say. But a lot of people just don't, even on occasions for people that they really value, they just find it very difficult to speak in a kind of ceremonial setting, which is a shame, really, because they are kind of obviously important occasions. So I think if what I really want to do, what I would ideally like to do is for people to do is make up their own poems. But if they can't, then they've got something there. If they can't make up their own poems or just speak something that they wanted to say, what it meant to them, rather. So that's it.
All right. Thank you.
Interestingly, a lot of people in Britain, there was a time in Britain when people were saying, "Oh, we shouldn't be calling Christmas Christmas. It's going to be upsetting Muslim people." And I always thought this was a bit funny because I used to work in an office with a lot of Asian people, and it was at Christmas time that it was all the Asian girls that got so excited about Christmas and that decorated the office. All the sort of like white, English girls said, "Well, yeah, we like Christmas, but I can't be bothered decorating the office. I might decorate my house, but I'm not going to decorate the office." But all the Asian girls were loving it. So I said to one of them, "Do you like Christmas?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we love it. Christmas. It's brilliant. I just love it all. I just love it all." And they're running off, putting up streamers and stuff. And then I said to another woman once, she said, "Oh," she came in and she said, "Oh God, I'm so tired. I was up all late. I didn't get to bed till after midnight last night because I was wrapping Christmas presents." And I said, "Christmas presents? What, you giving? You give each other Christmas presents?" She said, "Oh yeah, we do all that because they just love Christmas." So all this idea that, like, oh, you're going to be offending Muslim people, if you call Christmas Christmas. I'm thinking, well, first of all, we don't get offended when they call Eid Eid, and and actually a lot of Asian people absolutely love Christmas. They love all the lights and stuff. It's great. So, but what Eid actually is, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
All right. Well, thank you again, PD. This was
Well,
fun.
thank you for inviting me, Gareth. It's been good talking to you.
Very
Good
good
fun.
talking to you as well.